Hello, hello. Welcome to Wicked Words, the podcast where you get to listen to my terrible New England accent while I talk about true crime and other dark topics. My name is Brooke, and today we are going to be discussing the next episode in the Women Who Kill series. We are going by state in alphabetical order, so logically our next episode is going to be about Alaska. I have been doing as much research on this case as possible, but it seems like no matter what I do, there's just barely anything available that isn't really repeated multiple times in the sources that I've gone through. I did attempt to present this as best I could, and I know that it's been quite a while since I've uploaded. But I do have many in-depth projects going on right now simultaneously. Sorry, I butchered that word. And I'm trying to get them all done, but I'm also trying to remember to do some shorter episodes and upload those in the meantime. But these are going to be longer, hours-long episodes like my Darrell Brooks one. Like I said, I am trying to keep you all interested though, and I'm trying to get out some shorter content in the meantime. I just wanted to remind everyone that I am doing all of this. I do tons of research. I write, I record, I edit. I do all of this on my own, and I am blind and chronically ill, and I am a mother of two. So I appreciate every single one of my subscribers and that you guys really enjoy my content, and that's why I'm trying to get what I can out to you guys, but I also want to be sure that it's the best quality that I can present. My birthday is coming up, so my husband did buy me a new microphone. I just need to get him to show me how to work it. So hopefully that will be a nice feature in my next video. But in the meantime, let's get to this episode. On May 27th, 2007, an investigator for the Catholic Church in California phoned the Alaska State Police. The reason for his call that particular day, the investigator explained, was to ascertain whether there had been any cold cases from the late 1980s and possibly provide pertinent information that could lead to an arrest. While there were a few, Detective James Gallen knew exactly which case the PI was discussing when he divulged further details. The church member was assisting in the annulment process of a man named Christopher Reth. When Reth was questioned as to why he felt the church should grant his request, he stated that his ex-wife had confided in him that when she lived in Alaska with her first husband, she murdered him and disposed of his body. Gallen could not believe what he was hearing. Scott Colville was reported missing by his mother 20 years prior and was declared deceased after 6 years of silence. The last person to see Scott alive was his wife, Jane. Jane Nina Suchino was born on March 20th, 1964, the only child of Franz and Lily Suchino. The family immigrated to Glendale, California from Indonesia, becoming naturalized citizens in February 1980. At that time, the Suchinos changed their surname to Lim. There's not much information available about the family or Jane's upbringing. However, it was alleged that she had a fairly callous relationship with Lily, finding solace in her father. After graduating from Glendale High School, Jane attended La Sierra College, now known as La Sierra University, as well as Loma Linda University, obtaining a degree in physical therapy. People who knew her during her collegiate years described Jane as friendly, fun, and flirty. Her personality paired well with Scott Colville's adventurousness and impulsivity. Scott Michael Colville was the son of Kenneth and Rita Colville, born in San Diego, California on April 12th of 1962. Like Jane, not much is available publicly about Scott's childhood. His father was a medical technician and a member of the Seventh Adventist Church. Scott presumably attended services with his father, considering he had just taken a year after high school to volunteer on a missionary trip in Micronesia. La Sierra College is where he met Jane, and the two became friends initially, with their romance slowly but steadily blossoming over their freshman year. Scott studied biology, but in his junior year he decided to drop out. He announced that he would be moving to Alaska to become a commercial fisherman. Despite the distance, Jane and Scott maintained their relationship while she completed her courses. On the day of Jane's graduation, Scott showed up and surprised her with an engagement ring. Jane said yes, and the duo excitedly escaped sunny California and flew to their new love nest, awaiting them in Sitka, Alaska. Sitka is the largest city in the United States by land area. Located in the southeastern part of Alaska at almost twice the size of Rhode Island. But ironically, it's one of the least densely populated areas with a population of less than 8,500 residents. Named after the contracted native Tlingit phrase, Shi Aitika Zaachtl. I'm sorry if I completely messed that up. There was no pronunciation for it on Google. Sitka can be translated to people on the outside of Baranof Island. When it was conquered by the Russians in the Battle of Sitka, the territory was renamed to Novo Arkhangelsk, or New Archangel. During the economic downfall of the Russian Empire, the Alaskan land was sold to the United States, and Sitka was chosen as the transfer ceremonial site, which took place on October 18th of 1867. During the tumultuous period of the World Wars, the United States Navy and the Army both built service stations in Sitka, but after the fighting was done, both of the bases were deactivated. In 1959, Japan invested in the Alaska Pulp Corporation, and they entered into a 50-year contract with the United States Forest Service to produce pulp specifically from the wood grown in the Tongass National Forest. At its height, the APC employed over 450 people, and one of them was Mr. Scott Colville. Starry-eyed and stupefied, Scott arrived in Alaska and quickly found himself bouncing from job to job. It was not all glittering gold as he had expected, and he found work in the Sitka Sound seafood cannery before taking the position with the pulp mill. By this point, Jane had easily garnered a career of her own in her field through Alaska's enormous healthcare system, but the isolation and cramped, rundown mobile home that the couple were staying in created an ideal environment for resentment and toxicity to fester. Despite the looming dread, they married in the fall of 1987 in Sitka, having a formal ceremony in February the following year. This wedding took place in California to accommodate the newlyweds' extended family, however. It was only a month afterward that Rita and Ken received a phone call from their son and daughter-in-law. The couple were seeking marital advice after a seemingly intense argument. "I thought I would be happy all the time," Jane expressed to her in-laws. It appeared that they were feeling unprepared on how to deal with life when the honeymoon spark fizzles out. The older couple consoled the younger Covilles and offered them their long-standing support. Scott's parents had no idea this would be the last time they would ever speak to their son again. A few weeks following that phone call, Rita attempted to reach out to Scott to wish him a happy birthday, but the phone just rang and rang. Unsettled, Rita reached out to one of Scott's friends and asked if he had heard from Scott. Rita's heart sank lower into her stomach when Scott's friends responded that he hadn't heard from Scott since earlier that April. She attempted to ignore her gut feeling and assuage herself that the pair must have taken an impromptu trip. It wasn't unlike Scott, who marched to the beat of his own drum, although she would assume that she would hear from them if they had been in California. Rita knew that Jane had family nearby, but it didn't make any sense to her why they would not visit the Covilles if they had been visiting the Limbs. Rita continued to call her son once a week until May 30th, when an automated message played alerting the caller that the number they were trying to reach was disconnected. Rita realized she needed to contact the police, but they saw Scott's disappearance as having a plausible explanation, since Alaska was a notorious place for temporary workers. Sitka police dismissed her concerns, doing honestly the minimal investigation into the case. Rita grew even more apprehensive when she received a Mother's Day card signed by Jane from both her and Scott, but the postmark was stamped from San Bernardino, not Sitka. When the check she sent Scott was cashed, she knew that it wasn't her son who had done so. He would have at least called to say thank you. On June 8th, an article about Scott's disappearance was placed in the Sitka Sentinel, requesting any information be forwarded to the police, but it generated no leads. Investigators went to the trailer and discovered Scott's items, but they noticed that Jane's belongings were gone. Scott's truck was also gone. It was later located at the Sitka airport, but there was no evidence that Scott had bought a plane ticket. It's not illegal to go missing, authorities told Rita, and they couldn't drain resources looking into it when there was not even any proof that something nefarious had occurred. Sitka police attempted to gain contact with Jane, who was now living in San Bernardino, but she continued to avoid their calls. Interestingly, Jane could not cease her contact with Scott's family. She penned them a 3-page letter in the summer of 1988, which blamed Scott for a majority of their marital problems because of his marijuana use and struggle to maintain a job. She claimed that he had lost his mind, and Jane returned home from work one day to find Scott was nowhere to be found. Jane provided her phone number and told the Covilles to reach out to her, but they refused to have any conversation with Jane, fearing what they may say to her. Months later, the Covilles' phone rang. As they had with every single phone call, they anxiously answered, praying that this time it was Scott, but it was Jane's voice. She indicated that she had a party to go to and believed that she left a dress in the closet at their home. Jane was wondering if it was okay to send a friend to pick the dress up. Stunned, the Covilles refused her request and told her that if she wanted the thing so badly, she could come pick it up herself. Jane never arrived to collect the item. On June 21st, 1989, Scott Colville's name appeared in the Daily Sitka Sentinel once again, but this time Jane was requesting Scott appear for a divorce hearing. Returning to her maiden name, a newly divorced Jane found a physical therapy job in Southern California and began working on her master's degree in social work. Like Scott's father, she began attending Seventh-day Adventist services and became heavily involved in the church, donating a portion of her paycheck to various charities and actively volunteering in missionary work in Nepal and China. While Jane was out living her life, in 1994, Scott was declared deceased legally. Just 4 years later, this new and improved version of Jane attracted a man named Christopher Reth, a corporate jet pilot and San Bernardino Valley College graduate. Although the two met in California, they moved to Illinois sometime after they began dating, and the pair tied the knot in 2000. By 2005, they were calling it quits, though. And 2 years after, Chris filed for annulment. As part of the annulment process, an interview was conducted with a church investigator. And it just so happened that this person who held this position for the church was a former LAPD homicide detective. And when Chris discussed Jane's admission of murder, the PI felt he had a duty to investigate this further. Chris agreed to work with the Alaska State Troopers and secretly record Jane speaking about the murder. While this may seem like a slam dunk, it would actually be another 2 years before the law enforcement could fly out to Illinois and actually speak to Jane. When cold case detectives sat down with her, Jane denied even having anything to do with Scott's disappearance or death. But when she was confronted with the recordings, she confessed. Jane's confession alone, though, did not give them grounds for arrest, and they had to obtain physical evidence somehow, some way. When the investigators returned to Alaska, they searched for the mobile home that the couple had lived in, and to their shock, it was still standing. Police tore up the floor and the walls of this home, and they unearthed bloodstains. Even more surprising was the fact that Rita had kept her son's wisdom teeth from decades prior, which granted technicians the ability to create a comparative DNA profile for Scott. And when they tested this against the blood that they found in the trailer, it was a match. On January 13th, 2010, 1 year after her interview with police, Jane Lim was arrested by Kendall County Sheriff's deputies at her Oswego, Illinois apartment. She was extradited to Juneau, where she was detained at the Lemon Creek Correctional Center until her first court appearance on February 3rd, where Jane entered a plea of not guilty. 8 months later, she changed her plea to guilty. She was sentenced in March of 2011, and the prosecution requested 70 years, while the defense argued that Jane deserved only 5, alleging that she was the victim of domestic violence and had only killed Scott in self-defense. The judge, however, noted that her story did not align with the facts of the case. Jane and Scott had only been married for 6 months before he went missing. And while Jane had sought refuge at a women's shelter in the past, there was absolutely no other indication that could suggest that abuse was going on in their relationship. Jane admitted that the pair were in bed that night, and Scott came clean that he no longer wanted to be with her. Jane waited until he fell asleep, and she shot him with a .357 Magnum before she dismembered his body with an axe and destroyed their mattress, disposing of both in the city's trash. Sitka incinerated its refuge at this time, so Scott's remains were most likely cremated. Jane cleaned up the rest of the home and packed her things. She took Scott's truck and drove it straight to the airport, leaving it in the garage and boarding the first plane to California. Ultimately, Superior Court Judge David George sentenced Jane to 55 years, with 19 years suspended and 36 to serve. With good behavior, she could be eligible for parole on January 28th, 2034. She will be 70 years old. Until then, Jane will call Highland Mountain Correctional Center in Seward, Alaska, home for the rest of her natural-born life. Stepping into a more casual disposition here, I want to discuss a couple random things that I found during my research that I just kind of couldn't find a way to introduce in my script. Number one, there was a coworker of Jane's who testified on her behalf as a character witness and described her as being caring and service-based, and said that this was not the Jane that he knew. Number two, Jane worked for the Geneva School District when she lived in Illinois. I couldn't find an exact title for her, but I did hear that her description included working with children with disabilities. Number three, Christopher Reth opened his own aviation company in 2017, although it closed last year when he moved to Arizona. He has a new aviation business out there, and it appears that he is remarried and possibly has children. I hope he's seriously living his best life. Number four, unfortunately, Scott's father never got the chance to see justice served for his son as he passed away in 2004. Number five, the lead prosecutor in this case, Gene Seaton, was actually awarded Prosecutor of the Year in 2013, going on to retire 3 years later. Number six is a bit juicy. So there was a prosecutor with the Alaska State Troopers Cold Case Unit named Patrick Gullifson, and he retired in 2010 as his license was being suspended by the Alaska Supreme Court at the request of the Alaska Bar Association. And this was a consequence of Gullifson withholding DNA evidence in a defense from the defense team in a 2010 murder case, not Jane Reth's case, but a separate case. And the charges against the suspect in that case were actually dismissed afterwards as a result. Gullifson was best known for his involvement in the Michelle Linehan case, which is another infamous female murderer from Alaska. She was probably the only other female murderer from Alaska that I found any information on, and I couldn't find tons of information about Jane's case, and it's because A, Scott had been missing for 20 years. B, she did not have a trial. She pled guilty, and that made it very kind of simple and clean cut and tied the case up nice and neat. And there really wasn't much available to find out about this besides what was regurgitated by every news outlet that covered it. So I wanted to try and find something that was, just different and out there, but I really struggled with this one. Number 7. Another reason I really struggled to find information in this case is because the instances of Jane Reth and Michelle Linehan are both really two rare cases, especially because in the state of Alaska, the rate of murder for women is twice the national average, especially Indigenous women. It's beyond me. So to have women be the perpetrator in Alaska is quite rare statistically. Last but not least, I have number 8, which is Sitka, is where the Alaska State Troopers go for their academy training. They should be very familiar with the city, honestly, because that's where they all get to go before they become official state troopers. To finish this video and wrap it up a bit, I just want to say thank you again to everybody who subscribed and watches my videos. It means the world. You have no idea. I really enjoy doing this, and while I have a lot going on that I can't control, I try to get as much as I can done with this. And I have so many things in the works right now. I'm currently working on the Letitia Stout trial. That one has been interesting. I'm also working on the script for a rather lengthy video that takes place in Kansas. It was a case suggestion, and that one was extremely interesting. I branched off into multiple other cases with that one, but I attempted to bring myself in a little, and I'm going to focus on one case at a time and try to connect them a little more in the grand scheme of things. So I hope you guys all stick with me, and like I always say, I'll catch you on the flip side.